also, that stands between you guys and creamy pints and delicious cocktails, which I know as an Irish tech summit is the most dangerous place to be. I'm telling a story tonight about this company that myself and Anya Kerr co-founded called Kinzen, about the problem of misinformation that we're tackling. But I hope just for the next few minutes you might keep in mind one of the discoveries that we and our team have found as we've tried to solve this problem, and that's that as you hear reports about machines getting sentient and more human, you realize that the more machines advance, the more machine learning gets better at aping humans, the more important it is that humans are in the loop, that humans get to influence the outcomes of machine learning, because it's not magic, it's a recipe. The second thing I want to do is tell you a bit of a personal story about how I came to be someone who was very much an old, inky journalist to someone who cares about machine learning, and it all starts with a couple of revolutions. It starts here, actually. I haven't changed a bit since 1991. This is 31 years ago, my first publicity shot for RTE, and I show you this just to show you, in my career, the scale of the technological revolution that's impacted information, the media. So I'm sitting here with my 1999 Michael Guiney suit, in front of a dumb terminal, no internet, on a phone connected by a piece of plastic to another piece of plastic, and behind me, these are reel-to-reel tapes. These are magnetic tapes that we used to take razor blades and cut up and put together, and we called it radio. So this was the career that I started out as a radio journalist. Now, that was the first revolution that I experienced, this technological revolution in the creation of media. The second revolution was in storytelling. So this is me on the bridge over the Green Zone into Baghdad back in 2007, and I was a war correspondent and a conflict correspondent. And about a year after this picture was taken, there was a revolution in Iran, which I didn't go to cover because the revolution was covered by ordinary young men and women who were suddenly connected through camera phones and social networks, and they were the storytellers. It was no longer people like me, the foreign correspondents. It was ordinary young men and women who could reach a huge audience. So that was the second revolution. So at that time, I set up a company called Storyful, and we were the sort of news agency that sorted the news from the noise. The problem we solved was, if everybody can tell a story, who do you listen to? But then I went to work for Twitter, and there I discovered there was a third revolution, and it was the democratic revolution of social media. So you could start a movement from the ground up. You didn't need any elite gatekeeper like a media person or a journalist to start a movement from the grassroots. You just needed to find a way to connect authentically to people. And marginalized voices, voices that had been ignored by mainstream media, suddenly could bypass the mainstream media and speak their truth to power. Nothing about us without us. So that democratic revolution, we all know the kind of change that's created for our next generation. But here's the problem. The same forces, the same technology that created the democratic revolution have allowed the forces opposed to democracy to hijack that democratic revolution. We see it clearly in the United States in the last presidential election. We saw it during COVID, where anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theories were trying to persuade us that the vaccine didn't work, that Bill Gates was planting microchips in your arm. Now, we all think, we all do this with misinformation, that we're smart enough not to be caught out by this kind of stuff. But what we discovered when we set up Kinzen was that so much of what is misinformation transmits itself through the internet without us knowing what it is in the first place. So, to most point of view, I think we can all agree that we want to save the children. But this is not some innocuous hashtag that started. This is QAnon. We can see in this person's t-shirt the slogan, where we go one, we go all. It's QAnon. This was the hashtag that the QAnon conspiracy theorists in the United States used to populate conversations in places like Instagram, where people who were yoga teachers, people who were promoting wellness cures, their comment sections suddenly became hijacked by people like this. It got to the stage that the creators themselves, and these are people that have no connection to politics, had to come together to fight back against these conspiracy theorists who were, with their dog whistles, populating and hijacking these comment sections. So that's the problem that we're up against. We're up against language. We're up against people who are trying to evade detection and change our minds without us being conscious of it. And so for us at Kinzen, we realized it was a huge problem for the technology companies because machine learning doesn't detect the nuance of human behavior or language, but human moderators don't scale. You can't put tens of thousands of people to analyze the 500 hours of, let's say, YouTube video every minute. So how do you combine the human and the machine? And that was the mission that we set out to solve at Kinzen. What we do every day is we try to protect public conversations. Our solutions are utilized by 3 of the major technology platforms in the world. We work with fact checkers, public health authorities, and what we're doing is focusing on a specific threat, and that's the most complex of these threats. Other people protect children, protect against pornography, copyright. We're focused on dangerous misinformation, organized disinformation, and hate speech. And this is speech that has real-world consequences. It's not people disagreeing on the internet. This is, for example, in places like India, a level of genocidal rhetoric that's threatening lives because of anti-Muslim campaigns of disinformation. We focus on planned events like elections or persistent campaigns like COVID. At the moment, we're watching in Brazil where the President Bolsonaro is recreating Donald Trump's Stop the Steal to try stop himself getting forced out of power this October. And we're also focused on the big blind spot for Silicon Valley companies. And that's the languages we speak outside the United States, outside the English-speaking world. We're focused on the nuance of language and culture. So we have people all over the world watching how misinformation seeps into the local conversation. Now, we've also focused very much on what I think is going to be the next spoken layer of the internet. It's emerging, obviously, through podcasts. We've got an explosion of the number of individual podcasts. We all know how hard it is to manage this. 2.5 million podcasts online, 17,000 new podcasts every week on Spotify. So we know that's already happening, but we've also now got the explosion in live audio, spaces where ordinary people can have a conversation, and also the rise of user-generated podcasts and platforms like Anchor. And the place where audio is growing fastest is in the places where the internet is coming of age, in places like Latin America and Asia. So for us, that spoken layer, it's just like almost video was about 10 years ago, what's happening, and that's where we're focusing our attention. So as we looked at audio, and we're going to try solve this huge problem, like a perfect storm. Think about it. You've got hours of podcasting sometimes. You've got the complexity of language, and you've got very little content moderation going on. So we turned to the machine learning, and we came across this single problem. So what a machine learning model does when it comes to things like automatic speech recognition, what we do in transcripts, it's a glorified predictor. It's just guessing, putting words in order. So when you look at transcripts, they're very basic, and they're not designed to find out the misinformation. So we had to go from a place where we were literally just putting out transcripts and analyzing them with humans to combining a whole set of machine learning approaches. So first of all, automatic speech recognition, that could be finessed by the humans in our team. We're looking at big language models. We had to build new models on top of them that were optimized to detect these dog whistles. And we have a bunch of humans who at that stage are also feeding into the machine the level of severity. And what's happening then is our clients are able to look at vast amounts of audio and just get the 5 or 6 things that right now could be a matter of life and death in a place like India. And that's where we've come to, from here, there to here. So for us, what comes next is looking at the complexities of things like live spaces, where in the middle of a live conversation like this one, which is anti-vaxxers in Germany, we're listening out for slang, for tone, for humor. So much complexity in something like this that it's really difficult to find out how you could take a transcript and work out the intent of what's going on there. We have this complexity also of languages. So this is from one of our Swedish analysts, making the point that the machine learning model we were using to analyze Swedish was mistaking a basic part of the Swedish language. You compress words together. So we weren't detecting the most violent racial slurs because we regarded them in English as 2 words. In Swedish, they get joined together. So again, lost in translation. But what's really interesting now is a lot of these groups that are spreading misinformation, they're sort of wise to the fact that there's people like us, this machine learning models, trying to detect this toxic content. So they're starting to adjust language. to evade detection. Here's a good example. This was something we found a couple of weeks back. One of our German analysts realized that in the conversation, which is anti-vaxxers, they suddenly realized that the word for vaccine is almost exactly like the word in German for Smurf. So they'll start talking about Smurf, 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 which is a way for them to talk about vaccines without the machine learning detecting what they're talking about. Sounds funny, but it's actually being used by a whole lot of conspiracy theorists around the world. So, for example, last year, anti-vaxxers were using the word panini, dance party, to talk about the pandemic. And everywhere we go, we're finding this is an increasing trend, is that the people who are trying to evade detection are actually trying to change the way they speak. And so these are some of the complexities of trying to fix this problem. We've also seen as well that as we build language models, events like the pandemic, they're outstripping the data that was originally used to train these big language models. So when we came along to build our own taxonomy of terminology that the pandemic had created, we realized when we matched our top 250,000 terms that we were gathering, there was only this tiny overlap with the existing database. What that meant was these models couldn't recognize the words and phrases that were critical to detecting misinformation. So we've now had to literally build new models on top with data that, again, is a combination of human and machine. So for us, it all comes back to a data set. And this is, again, what I was saying at the beginning. The more the machine learning gets advanced, the more it starts to understand, the more it suggests things to us, the more it's so vital that we have human analysts all around the world. We'll be in 26 languages in the next 6 weeks. What these people are doing is they're building data sets that are then used to train the machine learning. And what it means is we can start to have this golden feedback loop where the humans create the data, the machines learn from the data, and the humans are fed the results. And it's just this endless process by which we can start to find the needle in the haystack. And the reason precision is so important is because what we're trying to do is stop Silicon Valley companies who have traditionally decided when there's something bad on the internet, just remove it. We're firmly believing that if you want to protect freedom of expression, the way to do that is to be very precise about finding language that causes real-world harm, and the stakes are so high. So as we develop technology, as we build out our human networks, we're also thinking about where content moderation has to go next. Now, we don't take the decisions. We supply the information that helps these teams of content moderators to make the calls in the various places we're looking at. But we're part of a movement of people that are trying to develop, first of all, voluntary codes, where we know that where these systems are being implemented, where content moderation is making a critical difference to life in different countries, that we have to have human review, that we have to have the balance of rights, freedom of expression, but also freedom from discrimination, freedom of health, that these rights are balanced in a very public way. So transparency going forward. We are firm believers in a group of activists who are developing a set of principles for content moderation, which include this extremely important statement, that companies should be using automated processes really only when they have a high degree of confidence in everything that went into the model in the first place, including the biases of the people that collect data. Now, there's voluntary codes, there's also approaching regulation. We see a lot of really nasty and I think troublesome laws being considered, from what we call fake news laws in places like Malaysia, where they're literally trying to just stop dissent in the name of fighting disinformation, to a little bit more subtle but also quite dangerous laws in places like the UK, where they're trying to essentially ban certain categories of what they would call lawful but awful content. It's impossible to define a piece of content in a law, because that piece of content will change dramatically moment by moment. I think what you end up doing is you encourage the platforms, when they have to abide by an online harm law, to just remove entire conversations, which we've seen again and again. You also start to see in these laws people forced to talk about who they are in public, which again is a real threat to dissent. And finally, I think we see out and out persecution of individual users of platforms and platform executives. So we think this concept of safety by decree is the wrong way to balance rights. We're a big believer in the approach taken here in Europe, the Digital Services Act that will be put in place next year, is essentially designed to try and solve the underlying problems, which are the algorithms and the business model. Because right now, there is no real form of audit or transparency on how these algorithms or these moderators make their decisions on what to recommend, or in some cases, what to take down. There are also these laws providing access by vetted researchers to get a hold of data inside these platforms to try and evaluate whether or not moderation is effective and balances those rights. And essentially, they're also talking about empowering the end user, giving people who use the internet way more consciousness of what's in the content that they consume, this kind of flagging or labeling. And it's the development of that system that's most exciting for us. So we're very happy to be part of processes that are at the heart safety by design. This Monday, we were named as one of the inaugural partners for the Spotify Safety Council. We work very closely with Spotify. And tomorrow we're off to Brussels, where we'll be part of the signatories of a new code of practice on disinformation, which for the first time unites big tech platforms, the European Union, civil society groups, organizations like us, and fact checkers. So this is happening. And in the sort of 12 or 13 years that I've been looking at this topic, I haven't seen such a concerted effort to create what I think is a more open, accountable, and transparent internet. But I'm a realist, and I'll leave it here. Like, I hear people like Elon Musk talking about Twitter as the public square. I hear Jack Dorsey, my former boss, talking about Twitter as the public consciousness. That's bullshit. You and I know that we're still living in an internet that is dominated by private companies that have given us all a chance to gather, do amazing things, but they're still private spaces. And so I think we should be thinking about the next 5 and 10 years. We should be thinking about ways that we can decentralize the powers that currently content moderators have to the creators and to the people who are moderating our conversations, the people who are hosting those communities. Find ways to make us all not subjects or users, but digital citizens. And that's the hope I have in the design of the public square. So I'm going to finish up by making an appeal, which is going to sound very nationalistic. In so many ways, without us knowing it, this new public square, the way that the private spaces we are living in, is actually evolving in this city, in this country. Tens of thousands of people obviously work in the big technology platforms. We can actually hear the building work for the Meta building during the day. They're working in these buildings around this city. We work with them every day. Vast majority of the people that we work with, we haven't come across people that don't want to build a better public square. And right now, we're starting to see critical change and movements, and people inside these platforms starting to come together, even in this particular city. So I hope what we'll see is those big glass boxes where those thousands of people work at the moment will become the hubs for the development of a real public square where there are this balance of rights, and that Dublin itself could become the safety technology hub for the world. And that's worth, I think, taking and investing time for the next few years. And with that, I'm going to say thank you very much. Enjoy your pints. I believe DC is paying for the first round. Thanks so much.